One of the most critical developments in the course of human history was the control of fire. Without fire, we probably wouldn't have even reached the Stone Age, let alone the Industrial Age. But how exactly did ancient people make fire? To make fire out of nothing is no easy feat, and it was a skill that had to be mastered for survival. Learn more about how humans made fire on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Jerry. One of the most unpleasant parts of owning a car is shopping for car insurance. You have to go from site to site, giving your information to all of them. But there's a smarter way. It's called Jerry. And it's not just another comparison site. It's the only car insurance app that does the hard work for you from start to finish. To get started, just answer a few simple questions once, and Jerry instantly compares quotes from over 50 top-rated insurers. Jerry even cancels your old policy for you, which means that switching is easy. Jerry has helped more than 5 million customers find the best car insurance. Stop needlessly overpaying for car insurance. Drivers who save with Jerry save over $1,300 a year on average. So before you renew your policy, do yourself a favor. Download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/daily. In just a few minutes, you can compare quotes and coverages from up to 50 top insurers. Jerry, car insurance made simple, smart, and finally on your side. Based on drivers who switched and saved with Jerry over the last 12 months. Over 20% of drivers who switched with Jerry found a monthly premium of $87 or less. Not all drivers find savings. This episode is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Do you know what doesn't belong in your summer plans? Getting burned by your old wireless bill. While you're planning beach trips, barbecues, and 3-day weekends, your wireless bill should be the last thing holding you back. And that's why I use Mint Mobile. With plans starting at $15 a month, Mint Mobile gives you premium wireless service on the nation's largest 5G network. The coverage and speeds you're used to, but just less money. So while your friends are sweating over data usages and surprise charges, you'll be chilling, literally and financially. With Mint Mobile, you can use your same phone number, and contact list, and even connect to the exact same towers and cellular networks. The only difference is the price. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get your summer savings and shop premium wireless plans at mintmobile.com/EED. That's mintmobile.com/EED. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. In a very, very early episode of this podcast, I addressed the topic of how humans harnessed fire. And harnessed is the key term because at first, and possibly for hundreds of thousands of years, humans couldn't actually make fire. They found fire when grass fires or forest fires broke out, and then they would keep it alive and carry it with them. At some point, humans figured out how they could make fire without having to find it in nature. And this was revolutionary. Maybe the first truly revolutionary discovery made by humans. As we look back, the big question is, how did they do it? There isn't a whole lot in the archaeological record to help us in this department. So, how do we know what ancient people did to make fire? Most of what we know has come from the written records of some ancient people, direct observations of native peoples, a few archaeological finds, and a branch of research known as experimental archaeology. Experimental archaeology is a branch of archaeology that seeks to understand ancient technologies, practices, and ways of life by recreating them using materials, tools, and methods that would have been available in the past. Rather than relying solely on the interpretation of artifacts and written records, experimental archaeologists actively engage in hands-on experiments to test hypotheses about how ancient people lived, built structures, made tools, cooked food, or started fires. By attempting to replicate historical processes, researchers can gain insights into the practical challenges and efficiencies of ancient techniques, helping to validate or refine archaeological interpretations. This approach bridges the gap between theoretical knowledge and lived experience, offering a more nuanced and tangible understanding of past human behavior. So, with that, I'm going to cover 4 known methods that people use to create fire before the advent of matches and lighters. But before I get into these methods, there's something that every one of these methods requires: tinder. Tinder is any material that catches fire from a small spark, ember, or flame, and then burns hot enough to ignite larger kindling. It's the first critical component in the fire-making process, especially when using primitive methods, where the initial heat or spark is weak and needs a highly flammable substance to take hold. Good tinder must be dry, fine, and have a large surface area relative to its volume, which allows it to catch fire easily and burn quickly. Natural materials that make excellent tinder include dry grass, shredded bark, especially from cedar, juniper, or birch, cattail fluff, dry moss, seed heads, and certain fungi, like the horsehoof fungus. Man-made tinders used historically and today include charcloth, which is fabric turned to carbon in the absence of oxygen, and finely shaved wood carvings known as feather sticks. The key is that the material must ignite with minimal heat and sustain a flame long enough to light larger, less flammable materials. So with that, the first fire-starting method used by ancient people is friction. Friction can obviously create heat. Just rub your hands together vigorously and you'll feel the heat. There are several techniques that we know of that can use friction to create embers. The first is the hand drill. This is one of the simplest methods for creating friction. It involves a thin wooden spindle that is rapidly spun between the hands while pressing down onto a fireboard, which is a flat piece of wood with a notch and a depression. Dust accumulates at the notch and eventually forms a small coal, which is transferred to the tinder bundle. A better technique than the hand drill is the bow drill. This is an improvement over the hand drill, as the bow drill adds a bow and a bearing block, allowing greater speed and pressure with less effort. You'll often see this method in various survival courses as a way to start a fire. It's not easy to do, and it takes practice. The fire plow is another friction technique that involves rubbing a stick back and forth in a groove carved into a fireboard. This motion creates a buildup of wood dust and heat, eventually igniting the material. And the final technique is a fire saw or a fire thong. Used in some tropical areas, this method involves sawing or pulling a cord rapidly against a piece of wood, creating friction to ignite the tinder. Bamboo is often used in regions like Southeast Asia due to its fibrous nature. All of these friction methods are indeed possible, but they're difficult to do if you aren't experienced. Also, all of these friction techniques involve organic materials, which is why we can't find them in the archaeological record. The second major method is percussion-based fire starting. This method involves striking materials to produce sparks, typically using flint and metal. Percussion-based fire starting has ancient origins and represents a major innovation in humanity's quest to reliably create fire. The earliest known method of this kind likely used natural materials such as flint and iron pyrite, also known as fool's gold. When struck together, these stones could create a small shower of hot sparks, capable of igniting dry tinder. This technique dates back to at least the Upper Paleolithic period around 40,000 years ago, and was widely used by prehistoric humans across Europe and Asia. As metallurgy developed, especially during the Iron Age, people began using carbon-rich steel in place of pyrite. Steel, when struck against flint, produced hotter and more consistent sparks. This transition marked a significant leap in the reliability and efficiency of firemaking. Flint and steel became common tools across much of the ancient world, including Roman, Celtic, and early medieval cultures. By the time of the Middle Ages, flint and steel fire kits were a standard part of everyday life, and often carried in small pouches that also contained tinder materials. The use of percussion fire starting remained dominant well into the 19th century, even after the invention of matches, particularly in rural and frontier settings where matches were scarce or expensive. It was eventually superseded by more convenient chemical ignition methods, but percussion fire starting never disappeared entirely. In modern times, the principle lives on in tools like ferro rods, which are short for ferrocerium rod, which uses similar mechanics but with more advanced materials. Even today, traditional flint and steel sets are still used by survivalists, experimental archaeologists, and historical reenactors, preserving a vital skill that once defined the boundary between survival and hardship. The third method of ancient fire starting is solar ignition. The history of solar fire ignition, particularly the use of burning glasses and reflective surfaces to concentrate sunlight, stretches back to antiquity and reflects humanity's early understanding of optics and the sun's power. While solar ignition was never the primary method of fire starting, due to its dependence on clear weather and daylight, it held symbolic, experimental, and sometimes practical importance across various cultures. The concept of using sunlight to start fires originated with the observation that certain natural crystals or water-filled vessels could focus light to a point hot enough to smolder dry material. However, the earliest reliable records of intentional solar ignition come from the classical world. In ancient Greece, the philosopher and mathematician Archimedes is famously, although somewhat mythically, credited with using large mirrors to concentrate sunlight and set Roman ships ablaze during the siege of Syracuse in the 3rd century BC. While the story is debated and probably apocryphal, it reveals a real interest in using reflective surfaces for ignition. Greek and Roman sources refer to polished metal mirrors and lenses used in religious ceremonies to light sacred fires. For example, in some temples, priestesses were said to use a scaphion or concave mirror to relight fires from the sun's rays, a method that ensured the fire was pure and derived directly from a divine source. The Roman author Pliny the Elder described burning glasses made of glass spheres filled with water, which could concentrate sunlight to ignite cloth or wood. In China and India, similar optical principles were explored. Ancient Chinese texts mention the use of polished bronze mirrors, and by the medieval period, both Islamic and Indian scholars were experimenting with convex lenses for scientific purposes, including combustion. In the Islamic Golden Age, scientists like Ibn al-Haytham explored refraction and light focusing, further advancing the theoretical basis for solar ignition. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment in Europe, the use of burning glasses became more common in scientific demonstrations. Large convex lenses or parabolic mirrors made of glass or metal were constructed to focus sunlight with astonishing precision, capable of melting metals or boiling water. The final fire-starting method that I want to cover is one that you might not be as familiar with, but it works surprisingly well. Fire pistons. The fire piston is an ingenious fire-starting device that uses the principle of rapid compression to ignite tinder through heat generated by air pressure. Its history is both ancient and geographically specific, primarily associated with Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, where it was used for centuries before being discovered by Western explorers. A fire piston consists of a hollow chamber, traditionally made from wood, bone, bamboo, or later metal, and a tightly fitting plunger. A small piece of tinder, often charred plant material or fibers, is placed at the end of the plunger. When the plunger is force-pushed into the cylinder, the air inside is rapidly compressed. This compression heats the air to over 400 degrees Fahrenheit or around 260 degrees Celsius, hot enough to ignite the tinder, which can then be transferred to a larger tinder bundle to create the flame. The origins of the fire piston are not entirely clear, but they appear to date back at least several hundred years and possibly over 1,000. They were used by various indigenous cultures in regions such as the Philippines, Borneo, Sumatra, and other parts of maritime Southeast Asia. The technology seems to have evolved independently in these humid tropical environments where traditional friction methods can be less effective due to moisture. In these societies, the fire piston was often crafted with great skill and passed down through generations. European explorers and colonists encountered the fire piston during the 18th and 19th centuries and were impressed by its efficiency and clever use of thermodynamics. This encounter helped inspire further experimentation with compression ignition, eventually influencing the conceptual development of internal combustion engines. In fact, the fire piston operates on the same principle as the diesel engine, which also relies on compression-induced ignition. As clever as many of these fire-starting methods were, they all eventually fell by the wayside with the development of the self-igniting chemical match in the 19th century. Fire starting is something that ancient people simply had to know. Without it, their lives would have been much poorer. And I'm guessing that if most people, myself included, were forced into a survival situation where we had to make fire out of what we found in nature, we couldn't do it. And in that respect, ancient people were probably a bit more advanced than we were. And it's a good thing that they were, because if they couldn't start fires, the world would be a very different place today. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Austin Oakton and Cameron Kiefer. I want to thank everyone who supports the show over on Patreon. Your support helps make this podcast possible. I'd also like to thank all the members of the Everything Everywhere community who are active on the Facebook group and the Discord server. If you'd like to join in the discussion, there are links to both in the show notes. And as always, if you leave a review or send me a boostagram, you too can have it read on the show.